Happy October, folks! Isn't it great? A whole month where all of Western society collectively agrees, yes, disemboweling pumpkins and placing them literally everywhere is perfectly normal, while doing that dressed up in cosplay. It's absolutely mental, I love it! You know what else is just as mental? The horrors of the Great War. So in the spirit of everyone's second favourite 8th month of the year, I've got quite the story to tell for you all. So go grab a pumpkin spice latte, sit back, and get comfy, because it's decorative gourd season, motherfuckers. August 1915, or July if you were Russian. The Great War has trudged on for just over a year now, with the dream of going home by Christmas being completely snuffed out in the charred fields of Flanders, Mazovia and the Austrian littoral. At this point, it wasn't even known if any of them were going home at all. At this moment, the German 11th Landwehr Division, the army led by the legendary Field Marshal Hindenburg himself, are on their way to smash a Russian fortress. The Germans are confident. I mean, why wouldn't they be? They have with them all the usual toys of war, but also with them is a new toy fresh off the factory floor, 30 artillery batteries filled with chlorine gas. They know the Russians don't have gas masks, so such a weapon would be absolutely devastating. With a division as well equipped as that, you'd be doing yourself a great disservice thinking that you weren't about to be riding home in a wave of glorious victory. I mean, surely a couple hundred peasants from the hinterlands of Poland couldn't step up to the most powerful army in the world, right? On the other side, you have the Russians, made up of 500 trained soldiers and 400 militiamen. They know that in the field of battle they would be completely wiped out. As such, they've stationed themselves in Auschwitz Fortress. The fortress is an incredibly well-defended one, surrounded by miles of forest and marshland and supplied by a train route directly from Auschwitz to Bialystok. The Russians too are rather confident. Sure, they may not be quite as well equipped as the Germans, but Auschwitz already managed to fend off the Germans twice in the last year. The idea of any army attempting to siege such a fortress in such harsh terrain, after already withdrawing twice before, in such a high-stakes war, was frankly unthinkable. With a fortress as well prepared and as well supplied as theirs, you'd be doing yourself a great disservice thinking you weren't just gonna hold out there forever. I mean, it's not like the great Field Marshal Hindenburg was gonna seat himself in a bog for months on end just to take out a couple hundred soldiers, right? "4 hours after midnight, August 6th, Hindenburg's army prepared to go on the assault once more. Their target? Auschwitz Fortress. Their plan? Fire the batteries of chlorine gas towards the fortress. They don't even have to fire within the range. So long as the gas was far enough away from the camp, the winds would do the job for them and blow it straight towards the fortress. Once they cleared up the few hundred men inside, they could quickly run on in and take it before reinforcements could arrive. From there, they could easily take the city of Bialystok, and once they took that, the gates would be wide open to roll into Moscow. Over the course of the next half an hour, the chlorine gas would travel a total of 20 kilometers, completely engulfing the area inside the fortress. At the same time, the Russian men stationed within the fortress could feel something in the air. It was getting thicker and thicker and thicker, until suddenly one of the militiamen began to cough up blood, and then a lung, and then finally he dropped dead. With no way of defending themselves from the gas, the attack was, as the Germans predicted, absolutely devastating. As the minutes piled on, so too did the bodies, and soon enough, all but 100 of those Russian soldiers were gone, their bodies quickly dissolving from the hydrochloric acid in the gas. For the remaining 100 or so Russians that were still what one could call alive, they had a choice. Either they could spend the last few minutes of their lives rotting away in a broken fort, or they could go on one last attack. After all, a desperate charge was better than just handing the fortress over to the Germans. And so, less than an hour after the first man dropped dead, the remaining 100 men grabbed their guns and decided to go for one last battle. Hindenburg's army were about to experience what history would only refer to as the Attack of the Dead Men. I want to, for a moment, put you in the shoes of a German soldier. You've been out in the fields of war for over a year now. If you're not physically scarred by your time in the field, you're certainly mentally scarred. You know that you've seen it all by now, so a crumbling fortress full of corpses should be nothing new to you, right? You and your squad are running to the fortress before Russian and Polish reinforcements arrive. But suddenly, out of the distance, men, lots of them, charging directly towards you. You can't make out just how many there are through the early morning fog and the constant salvo of artillery. So there could just be 20 of them, or there could be 200. You would have no way of telling. As they get towards you, you can better make out the silhouettes of the men through the fog. They're in terrible shape, so this should be easy. You go to fire your rifle, and then suddenly, these men appear clearly through the fog. Their faces malformed, with eyes, teeth, hair, and chunks of flesh missing. Their uniforms are ripped, covered head to toe in blood and mire. These men, they can't speak. They can only grumble and can be seen coughing their lungs out on the battlefield. At this point, you realize, these are no men. What you're witnessing here before you is an act of God. By the looks of things, the Russians in the fortress have risen from the dead for a short while, and now they want to take you with them. As you can imagine, for the ordinary soldier on the ground, such an experience would be absolutely mortifying. As any sane soldier would when encountering a horde of the undead in the middle of Poland, Hindenburg's army frantically retreated away from the fortress. Unfortunately, the nature of such an unorganized retreat meant that many German soldiers got caught in their own barbed wire defenses and were unfortunately killed. Despite losing every single soldier involved in the battle, against all odds, the absolutely mortifying experience of the Russians during their last stand was enough to secure them a short yet legendary victory. While the Germans, shocked and terrified, had to retreat and regroup, the sheer devastation of such an event wasn't one the Russians could bounce back from. The German frontal attack may have been a Russian victory, but another army was quickly approaching on the western side of the fortress, and it was only a matter of time before the Russians would eventually have to fall back. Less than 2 weeks later, on August 18th, with a more successful German army having already made it to Kaunas by this point, the Russians had no choice but to retreat from their positions for good. The fortress was left mostly demolished for the rest of the war. I'll be honest, this honestly feels like a disservice to tell the ending of the story. It's a legendary tale that, unfortunately, has a less than legendary ending. I guess such is the fate of the Great War. No heroes, no villains, only destruction. Well then, that was that. I hope you all enjoyed this little story. Maybe next year I'll actually find something that's England related. In the meantime, have a nice and safe Halloween. Maybe spread the love to some of your friends. Give those kids banging on your door the gift of sweet, sweet knowledge through their trick-or-treat bags. Have a good night, folks.